Alright, hi everyone, I'm Reviewer1, and you might be wondering why I'm totally ripping off Todd in the Shadows here. Well, you see, aside from the fact that I'm of course totally unoriginal, I'm in hiding. Again. But only this time I was actually smart enough to learn my lesson and to no longer give away my location in my videos. Yes, I actually needed to realize that. And also needed to realize that when you start shooting at cops, they will probably start shooting back. I'm not very smart. Although I was smart enough to totally bring down communist China. Yes, I did bring it down. China is not communist anymore. I'm still counting that as a victory. And to orchestrate the Vietnam War, so personally I do think that I have some talents. But that's not really why I'm here right now. I just want to do some random rants on movies. And in case you're thinking that it's totally pedestrian and stupid, let's remember that Confused Matthew also... Okay, maybe that's not that good a defense. So I wanted to start off discussing how dark action movies and movies that are supposed to be fun and popcorn movies, how dark they are allowed to be. Because what I found very interesting is that Confused Matthew recently, ranted on Guardians of the Galaxy. Well, not that recently, almost a year ago, but I always do this after the fact. Once again, ripping off a far better critic than me. But so the point is, Confused Matthew did a very long rant on Guardians of the Galaxy, complaining that it was supposed to be a fun, enjoyable action comedy, but it was way too dark. Which is ironic because the Nostalgia Critic and, his brother Rob Walker, they both really loved the film, like most people did. And Filmmaster Adam loved it as well. But so what I found to be incredibly interesting about this is that the Nostalgia Critic totally complained that Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was far too dark. Which, ironically, Confused Matthew does seem to like. But what I find even more interesting is that I will just defend both films, Temple of Doom from the Nostalgia Critic and Guardians of the Galaxy from Confused Matthew, by pointing out that both of these can clearly follow the trend of The Empire Strikes Back. Yes, I am going there. If you look at it, Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope reinvented the science fiction genre by making it light-hearted and fun and exciting and bringing back the 30s movie serial fun enjoyment factor. But so what's really interesting is that then after that they wanted to make the second chapter a lot darker, the dark middle chapter, which was also a lot slower and a lot more spiritual. And back then, The Empire Strikes Back actually got a mixed reception and people complained it was boring, and yes, I am going here and I know it's blasphemy, but people complain that the Star Wars prequels are boring now. And just as people sometimes now complain that Revenge of the Sith was too dark, although many people liked it about it, people back then complained that The Empire Strikes Back was too dark. And the way that people complained not enough happened in Attack of the Clones because it was a middle chapter, people complained about this with The Empire Strikes Back. And that's also why I've always found it intriguing that nowadays some people still repeat the criticisms that were levied at Temple of Doom when it first came out, because the criticism that Temple of Doom was too dark was mainly aimed at it at its release, but the same thing happens with The Empire Strikes Back. Nowadays people only use this to praise The Empire Strikes Back, but some people still repeat this about Temple of Doom, and I wonder why. Temple of Doom was the middle chapter, and therefore it was a lot darker. The Nostalgia Critic argued that it had no real dramatic purpose, but I think it clearly does. The same way that Luke underwent a lot of deep character drama in The Empire Strikes Back, you can clearly see that Temple of Doom was really about seeing Indy's darker side and seeing him start off as being a corrupt mercenary. Balog had said in Raiders of the Lost Ark that it would only take a small push to take him out of the light and make him like, well, Balog, to make him himself just a grave robber. And we see in Temple of Doom that he actually is. We see that he's almost as bad as the Prime Minister that he criticizes at first, because he doesn't want to bring the children back. He actually wants to leave them to be tortured. He just wants to get the stones without returning them to the people that they were important to, leaving their villages in Desiree just to get fame and fortune. But when he hears the screams of torture, he eventually just has to do something about it, so he throws a rock at one of them, and then he's captured, and we see how everyone is tortured and how much they suffer, and he shares in their suffering, and after that he's even possessed, and then Short Round even admits that he loves Indy as a father figure, of course, when he tries to take him out of it, and he actually succeeds, and this makes Indiana Jones realize just how much he cares about Short Round, and they even have a very heartfelt hug moment, and this is when he says that they will get out of there, but all of them, and that's the moment that he truly became a hero. So I think it clearly served a dramatic purpose, and of course, as the Cinema Snob and his friends have pointed out, to make the villain more memorable. And come on, everybody knows that Mola Ram is freaking awesome. He's like the Darth Vader of the Indiana Jones series. But so I think that it served a very clear purpose. And on a side note, I found it totally silly that he complained that the whole portrayal of Hinduism and that was racist, because they didn't pretend that all Hindus were like that. They simply showed that within the thousands kilometers long and wide India, with over 1 billion people and various local tribes and local cultures and local variations on the religion, that there was one cult which had become totally messed up and practiced the Hindu religion in a messed up way. And it's not historically inaccurate, because there have been Hindus till very recently that practice human sacrifice. Still, there are a lot of Hindus nowadays that burn widows at the stake, and that's not racist, that's simply true. Was Raiders of the Lost Ark racist by showing the Nazis as villains? Was that offensive towards Germans? Of course not. There were Germans that were Nazis, and there were Hindus till very recently that practiced human sacrifice. Just as there till very recently, in fact, still nowadays, are Hindus that still believe in witch hunts. And just as there is still cannibalism in certain parts of Africa. That's just not racist. But so, I find it very interesting that most people have nowadays rejected the criticism that Temple of Doom was too dark, but so now Confused Matthew levied this criticism at Guardians of the Galaxy. And so this really raises the question, how dark can a popcorn movie be? Well, first of all, the question is really, what is a popcorn movie? Because nowadays, we don't just want action films to be mindless anymore, we want them to be well written, and the Nostalgia Critic argued that The Avengers was a good example of a well written but mindless action film, but most people would argue that The Avengers had excellent character developments, as I've done so myself, and I'm of course one of the best reviewers out there. I'm brilliant. I totally outdo Roger Ebert. No, wait, that's too soon. But so the point is, I'm an all-around brilliant person, and except for the fact that I didn't realize that you should. But we've already talked about that. I've learned my lesson with regards to the cops. We've all made the mistake every once in a while to think that nowadays they've become real pussies, which they have, but apparently they still have survival instinct. In 10 years, that will be gone. But what was I talking about again? Oh yeah, so the Avengers actually had very deep character development. We really saw how they not only grew as a team, but also as kind of a superhero family, and how they came to live up to their potential. I mean, even people like Black Widow got a whole lot of development. She dealing with her past, which is nicely kept subtle, but slowly revealed step by step in the later movies, and her also dealing with how she wants to try to better herself and help Hawkeye. We see how the Hulk has to deal with how he feels like a threat to everyone else, and as though he's cursed, and we see how Iron Man tells him how his disability basically became a part of him, and we see how he clashes with Captain America's more traditional stoic values. All of their characters were utilized extremely well. We still see some of Thor's big-headedness and his spiteful attitude towards humans, which he still has to a degree, and how Nick Fury acts messed up behind the scenes, and we even see Hawkeye dealing with having been brainwashed and having had to kill S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. So I don't see how the Avengers was just a mindless action film, but that's the point. Nowadays, when we watch action films, we want to care about the characters, we want to see them grow, we want to grow with them. Even films like The Matrix had Neo have a real character arc, and some people have complained that characters in that were too bland, but what I find interesting is that nowadays it seems as though any character that's more stoic or cold is therefore automatically bland, and I don't really get it. I don't see why all characters need to be totally over the top or in your face in order to be interesting. Characters can be more subdued or subtle or serious and still be interesting characters, and that can also be the case in action films. I mean, not all action stars have to be like Indiana Jones, not all of them have to be wild cowboys. I think that's just a little bit silly. But so the point is that most people seem to realize that we like to really feel for characters, we like to grow with them, we like to go on an internal journey, we'd like to see real friendships develop, we like to get to know their backstories, and we all find that incredibly important. So nowadays, most action films aren't really mindless anymore, in that because of how many great effects there are nowadays and how intense action can be and how much we've seen of that. Nowadays, that's just not exciting anymore. We need to be personally invested. We don't just want to watch a fireworks show, we want to truly be involved with the people in it. So I don't think that there's any real wish for a pure popcorn movie anymore. All films need to have some drama, some emotion, some heart to it. Otherwise, they usually get incredible backlashes and they just aren't popular anymore. You can do a lot with CGI, but so what's very important is that you also use it to just tell a very emotional, heartfelt story. And of course, actors are very important at crafting good characters, but a lot of the time, films can still be criticized because the actors' performances were wasted on a bad script. In the end, acting like effects needs to help convey a strong, at least character-based story. And then you can argue about how complex it needs to be, but so the idea that popcorn movies nowadays just are like mindless adventure films with just endless action, that's already actually incredibly outdated. Action films nowadays are supposed to really have heart. And not only that, but the thing is, if we're invested in the characters, not only is the action more intense and are the stakes more meaningful, but the story in general just feels like it has a grander purpose. Because in the end, we want the action to be part of a greater whole. And that's why the writing for an action film is still very important nowadays. Pacing, of course, also helps. All of these executionary elements are important, but in the end, we do need to be invested. And so that's why nowadays action films also tend to be a little bit darker, because the thing is, if characters are just lighthearted about everything, or if only very small, minor, easy conflicts happen to them, then it generally doesn't feel like there's a real struggle. You cannot have incredibly intense action and death-defying situations if the characters don't really feel like they exist in a world where death occurs. If characters live in a world where they don't really have to deal with death, or with destruction, or with the consequences of their action, then the action has no realistic value. And I actually think that that's far more important than how realistic action is. I think that's what's far more important is how realistic the universe is. A lot of people criticize the action in the Star Wars prequels for being too over the top, and then in the Hobbit films, but nowadays in almost all action films, action is incredibly over the top, and heroes can take out many enemies at the same time. That's basically become a standard thing. That's also what happened in the Avengers, and so that's why I find it silly that that criticism is still levied so much at something like the Star Wars prequels, where Indiana Jones takes out people left and right, and most of the goons he faces aren't really a real threat to him at all. He takes down Nazis with ease. He can fight multiple people with swords at the same time. So the thing is, nowadays, action is also supposed to ironically have elements of fun in it, and to just be creative, surprising, original. That's often considered far more important, that it surprises you, and then that we do the whole typical, is the character gonna die thing, because mostly main characters don't die, so to just have them endlessly face bad guys that they can't really defeat, but it can't really defeat them either, like an endless game of chess, usually isn't that exciting anymore. Having people run from stormtroopers and the stormtroopers never hit them, but having them occasionally hit one, doesn't really make for that great tension anymore nowadays. And heroes taking down enemies by the truckload is at least incredibly impressive, which is one of the important values of action. Which is another aspect, is that I think that nowadays action films are not really tensionful anymore, precisely just for the whole factor of, are they gonna die or not? We usually know that they are not. It's more interesting in that we want to see the characters triumph over their personal issues, and that we want to see them succeed as heroes, not just as the everyman. The Nostalgia Critic explained perfectly in this video that eventually became boring, people just trying to survive. Nowadays we want to see people achieve greater goals, and that's one of the aspects in which Guardians of the Galaxy was very successful, and that it was an action film, but it didn't treat destruction as just fun. It showed how they were actually trying to protect civilians and treated every life as important as in real life. And that's where the action became important, because regular civilians could get killed, and that's why the action in the end once again had meaning, and that's why it also was more creative and interesting to see. But so that shows that things like genocide and war are usually necessary to nowadays make action exciting. And another thing is that he thought that it was supposed to be funny and comedic, but a lot of comedies nowadays are dark, and darkness can also just help convey humor, because as we've seen with Adam Sandler films, just mindless, over-the-top fun and goofy antics generally don't entertain people anymore. The thing is, humor can be sophisticated, action can be sophisticated. The term dark comedy is very old, but it's becoming increasingly more important, and it's in fact one of the things that made the Nostalgia Critic and the Angry Video Game Nerd their videos so interesting. In fact, if you look at the anniversary specials of That Guy with the Glasses.com, even that started to incorporate the darker elements, because the thing is that humor is also a lot more funny when you truly feel for people, when they feel real, and if you're depressed, then you often watch movies to cheer yourself up, but a lot of the time it's ironically a lot nicer to experience fun with characters if you feel as though you also suffer with them. If you can relate to their suffering, you can also more relate to their joy. So I think that action films can actually be incredibly dark, and I think that comedies can be incredibly dark. Many successful ones have been, and it seems to be very subjective that people sometimes complain, oh, this doesn't fit well together, it's totally bipolar, but at other times it is a-okay. I really want to ask people why The Empire Strikes Back was totally a-okay, but something like Temple of Doom wasn't. And people have complained that in Temple of Doom the humor was too goofy, people have complained about that in the Star Wars prequels, but if you look at Revenge of the Sith, Jar Jar doesn't even have a role in that. And I mean, if you look at Guardians of the Galaxy, the humor in that was far more goofy. And then the Confused Matthew again complains that the humor is too childish. But so the thing is, nowadays we generally like films with a tone that's all over the place. Red Letter Media complained about this when reviewing Revenge of the Sith, but that brings up another issue. In real life, we often feel many intense emotions at the same time. That's just often how life is. And this is also what made Pixar films excellent. They had all of the humor, excitement, and joy of typical kids' cartoons, but they also felt real and dramatic. They introduced children to adult art while introducing adult adults to kids art. And another thing that I quickly wanted to mention is that I found it to be incredibly interesting that Filmmaster Adam complained that the Avengers Age of Ultron was overstuffed and overly complex and too much focused on drama and not nearly as much fun as the first Avengers, when those were ironically similar criticisms that Confused Matthew had aimed at Guardians of the Galaxy, and I totally agree with Filmmaster Adam on Guardians of the Galaxy, not with Confused Matthew, but so I found it to be incredibly funny that Guardians of the Galaxy, in his opinion, was still a lot of fun and a fantastic film in spite of being very complex and stuffed and dark, but that he didn't give the same break to Age of Ultron. I think that the same arguments that can be used to defend Guardians of the Galaxy, that the dark aspects only made the humor all the stronger and made you care more about the characters, that they can be applied to Age of Ultron, and that just as Guardians of the Galaxy was very complex but managed to fit it all in, just like The Dark Knight Rises for example, that Age of Ultron also managed to do this. He complained about a couple of story points here and there, but overall it seems as though the film did manage to convey its themes very well. So I wonder what exactly his problem was with it being so overstuffed, especially as it still had a lot of fantastic action and also quite a bit of humor. And now for something completely different. I recently, of course, did my refutal of Confused Matthew's criticisms of Marvel Studios, but since then I've done even more research and I've come across a couple of very interesting things. So Confused Matthew cited Cinema Blend when it came to claiming that Jon Favreau wasn't happy with how Marvel had interfered on Iron Man 2, but what's interesting is that they provided no interview there or anything, that we had no clips of Jon Favreau actually saying it, but that they said that they had an anonymous source that had said this. So Confused Matthew bases his claim that Jon Favreau was screwed over by Marvel, he bases that on Cinema Blend, which bases itself on an anonymous source. So it's just really hearsay. And to find this to be especially interesting, because he, after this, automatically treated this as fact. He just treated one source as completely reliable, even though it provided no proof. And he treated this so much as fact that when Jon Favreau defended Marvel over the whole Edgar Wright affair, he treated him as a director without any balls who should tell Marvel to go fuck themselves, because they would have apparently also screwed him over. But since then, other interviews have shown up that clearly show that Jon Favreau doesn't agree with what Cinema Blend said and doesn't think Marvel screwed him over, because he tells a story completely to the contrary. Confused Matthew tries to sustain Cinema Blend's story by saying he indeed didn't return to direct Iron Man 3, but he still executive produced that, and he said he was very happy with it. That is like being a grandparent that gets to play with the baby without having to change its diaper. And he also executive produced The Avengers, and yeah, he also did return to star, and he was incredibly happy with that. And the thing is, he claims that he didn't at all depart from Marvel over any form of creative controversy or because he wasn't happy with how he was being paid. Cinema Blend claimed this, but I haven't really been able to find any source that sustained this. Jon Favreau actually said something completely different over why he didn't return. He wanted to direct Magic Kingdom, and on LATimes.com, you can read that it says that Favreau walked away from the Iron Man franchise that pulled in $1.2 billion in worldwide grosses, and that had raised the career of Robert Downey Jr. and helped Marvel Studios become a real blockbuster player. And it indeed acknowledges that in some corners of the internet the rumors of Favreau's departure had been framed as a money issue or a conflict regarding Marvel's aspiration to have all its superhero films cross over into one another. But on Tuesday, Favreau said that he remains close to Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige, that the executive has even been an informal sounding board for Magic Kingdom ideas, and that he will stay on as producer on the Avengers, Marvel's 2012 superhero team-up film. Favreau said Marvel and I both came of age together, and he said the years that we shared were a pivotal experience. Kevin has a firm grasp on the many franchises and how they all interweave, and I'm happy that I had the opportunity to establish the world that these characters can now play. Clearly he had no problem with the whole concept of a cinematic universe, and clearly he didn't think this went against the concept of just making movies. He said, Iron Man has given me tremendous opportunities, and Kevin and I are enjoying a lot of momentum in our careers thanks to the Iron Man films. I look forward to seeing what others can do playing in the same world. I was also immediately skeptical about what Confused Matthew said over Jon Favreau, because I had once read the production history of Iron Man 2 on Wikipedia, and there it said that Jon Favreau had himself announced that S.H.I.E.L.D. would continue to play a big role in Iron Man 2. He had, after all, himself introduced it in the first Iron Man, so the idea that Marvel would have to force him to include Nick Fury after he had introduced him in the end credit scene of the first film, and he had wanted Samuel Jackson to play him, just sounded incredibly strange. And now obviously I don't just blindly follow Wikipedia, anymore. So I actually went ahead and looked up what Jon Favreau himself said about Iron Man and about Iron Man 2. And I came across some very interesting things. Favreau was asked if Nick Fury would appear in Iron Man 2, and Favreau himself responded, S.H.I.E.L.D. is important to the franchise, and what is S.H.I.E.L.D. without Fury? So again, it now just seems really strange that he would have been forced to include him. Or the Captain America shield after he himself had willingly already included it in the background of the first Iron Man. And I mean, who wouldn't want to himself include Scarlett Johansson in anything? I mentioned in my last video how Joe Johnston and Kenneth Branagh were both two excellent and famous directors that had worked on Marvel films, but what I failed to include was that both of them had excellent experiences working with Marvel, as I showed that Jon Favreau had as well. He had, instead of being screwed over by Marvel, a wonderful experience working on two of their films in a very important capacity, but also having a minor executive producer role on two more, which they gave to him because they greatly valued how he had set up the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which he gladly did for them. And just because one anonymous source of CinemaBlend claims he wasn't happy with it doesn't mean that that can be used to refute his own words, or that it can be used to claim that he sucks up to Marvel and is being a coward when he is defending them in the whole Edgar Wright controversy. The reason he defended them is because they didn't screw him over, and they also hadn't screwed over Joe Johnston or Kenneth Branagh, both who were incredibly happy to work with the studio. Here, I'll read what Joe Johnston had to say about his experience working on Captain America. He compared it to his experience on The Wolfman, which he described as terrible. He described all kinds of production problems as being amongst the main reasons why the film hadn't worked out. But so, he said Captain America was a lot of things. Every picture has its highs and lows, its dreads and excited anticipations. To fully understand the Captain America experience, I have to keep reminding myself that I had just come off another film I shot in the UK, The Wolfman. The two experiences could not have been more different. In fact, in many ways, certainly not all, they were polar opposites. I had 3 weeks of prep on Wolfman, a ridiculously inadequate amount of time to try to bring together the fractured and scattered pieces of the production. I had taken the job mostly because I had a cash flow problem, the only time in my career I've ever let finances enter into the decision process. Money is always the wrong reason for doing something that requires passionate devotion. The production was a leaky, rudderless ship in a perfect storm, suffering from bad decisions, infighting reluctance on the powers that be to take responsibility, and too many underqualified cooks in the kitchen. The good news and bad news about directing is that when the picture works, you're shout with all the credit, and when it doesn't, you're dumped on with all the blame. Unless you're George Lucas. You are dumped on with all the blame, but you are showered with none of the credit after Gary Kurtz claimed that he was responsible for the movies that were great, and everyone believes him because when Gary Kurtz says that he was the one who made Star Wars great, obviously he has got no reason to be biased about I've talked about it in the past. But so he said both scenarios are undeserved. I take full responsibility for the Wolfman not working because it goes with the territory. There were wonderful aspects of the Wolfman experiences. I inherited a crew that was the best of my experience, including a first assistant director without whom I could not have made it through the first 2 weeks. I had the immense pleasure of working with a cast that was as diverse and multifaceted as it could be. I rediscovered all the love about London and its environs, and I made some lifelong friends on and of the crew. Then about Captain America, he said, I had 30 weeks of prep on Captain America. Oh, such a horrible studio that's only caring about money and isn't concerned with anything else. Such a greedy studio that just wants to put out movies as fast as it can without any regards for quality. I have a small team of qualified, supportive, creative producers who are actually helping me achieve my vision of the film. Oh, they just wanted to make commercialized pieces of entertainment, as you can see. I had a dream cast headed by Chris Evans. I had the best designers, artists, sculptors, craftspeople, a creative team that could design, build and photograph anything and have it look amazing and beautiful. We had unbelievable luck with the weather wherever we shot in England. The weather was so good we were compelled to make it rain for a couple of sequences just for some variety. At times I felt as if the gods were saying, sorry about that Wolfman thing, let us make it up to you. Now, I do have to paraphrase Captain America here, saying there's only one god, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that. Sorry, there aren't multiple gods, Joe Johnston. I hope you convert quickly, and yes, that was heavy-handed. But so he said, Captain America was probably the most universally positive experience I have had in this mad business. And this is Joe Johnston, the guy who brought us October Sky, so yeah. And The Rocketeer. And Jurassic Park 3. But he also brought us October Sky. And I actually like Jurassic Park 3, as did Confused Matthew. But so, they clearly don't fuck over everyone with talent. I mean, as I've mentioned in the past, look at how many films Samuel Jackson was willing to appear in and how many films Scarlett Johansson wanted to appear in. Look at people like Mark Ruffalo. Look at Robert Downey Jr., all fantastic talents who kept appearing in more and more Marvel films. And as I've shown, Jon Favreau is on the good side of Marvel, not on the I hate Marvel side. And now let's get to Kenneth Branagh. On Screen Rant, Kenneth Branagh said, I think we love the escapism of something like Cinderella, and I think we do with Thor, and as long as we can believe that there's a connection between us and a bunch of guys riding on horses across a rainbow bridge in space, and somehow connected to the Norse myths, we get the adventure, we get the escape, we get the immersion in another world that's different from ours. So we're really happy to go to a big darkened room to see that. That just sounded a little bit preferred, but and with Cinderella, I felt that invitation to be immersed in a vibrant, glamorous, highly colored world was really important as a sensory experience, at least for the senses. But at the middle of it, people we can sort of see in the mirror. I've seen more of the movies, and as I've said before, I had a good time there. It was really a sort of pivotal moment to me doing Thor, and I like them. I like Kevin Feige very much. You know, you never say never. I think I couldn't begin to speak for the complications of the interweaving of this ever-expanding universe, which is totally fascinating to behold. Hey, you see, even Kenneth Branagh loves the concept of a cinematic universe and thinks it goes along with movies just fine. He doesn't see them as commercials. He loved working with them. He loved Kevin Feige. He doesn't think they're commercialized waste at all, and I think that even if you like Edgar Wright, you can acknowledge that his films weren't nearly as successful as those of Kenneth Branagh or of Joe Johnston. I'm just going to be honest, one of the things Confused Matthew liked Edgar Wright the most for was a television series, but when it comes to his movies, they were never really big blockbusters, and they usually didn't even make nearly as much money as the budget that Ant-Man got. And not only that, but if you also look at it, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World might have been a great film in the opinion of some, others would contest this, but the thing was, it was a commercial failure, even though it was a big budgeted film, and for his first foray into mainstream, it wasn't that successful. And of course, he's a British director that would also have to adapt to American kinds of movies and to a more kid-friendly kind of film, so it's totally understandable that he would just clash with Marvel over creative decisions. But so, back to Kenneth Branagh, but he said, but I think they're masters of their own destiny, they know what they want, and we all got on terribly well. So I'm sure if they felt that it was a spot for me somewhere in there, they'd give me a shout. This is, by the way, about whether he would return for Ragnarok. And of course I'd listen, but it's not something I'm actively seeking or looking for, although I am actively enjoying and seeking out the movies every time they come out, so I'm definitely a fan of the world. Kenneth Branagh and Joe Johnston both enjoyed working with them, yet only worked on one movie. Well, you know, Jon Favreau not only returned for Iron Man 2, but executive produced 2 of the other films, and Joss Whedon returned for a television show and for a sequel. And now the Russo brothers will return for Captain America 3 and for both of the parts of Avengers Infinity War. So clearly they're quite capable of keeping talent around, if you just look at how Mark Ruffalo returned, and if you look at how Robert Downey Jr. kept returning. So I still don't think Confused Matthew's criticisms on them are very fair, and I actually think he did very poor research for his claiming that they are a total dictatorship. Lastly, Edward Norton actually in 2014 in an interview said about why he didn't return to play the Hulk in the Avengers. My feelings was that I experimented and experienced what I wanted to, and he said I really enjoyed it, and yet I looked at the balance of time in life that one spends not only making those sorts of films, but then especially putting them out, and the obligations that would rightly come with that. He said he wanted more diversity with his career, pointing out that the schedules for films he has that appeared recently, like Moonrise Kingdom, The Grand Budapest Hotel and Birdman, would have conflicted with the Avengers films. He added that he didn't want to be associated with just one iconic character. So yeah, it seems as though Marvel was right saying he wasn't all that passionate about the role, especially as he didn't advertise the Incredible Hulk. And Marvel had given him a lot of creative freedom because he had been allowed to rewrite the script of the Incredible Hulk and even to make the role of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the story much smaller, which indicates that Marvel is totally willing to not have their cinematic universe concept interfere too much with other films. And Norton also said, I think you can sort of do anything once, but if you do too many times it can become a suit that's hard to take off in other people's eyes, Norton said. So, they didn't even really screw over Edward Norton, and they didn't screw over Jon Favreau, and Edgar Wright hasn't shown any animosity towards Marvel either. The only person who really criticized them the way Matthew did was Mickey Rourke. And that's it.